Om Shri Aurobindo Ma Meera. Open my mind, my heart, my life to your light, your love, your power. May I see the divine in all things. Before we get started with uh, the next aspect of work as a sacrifice, I'd like to spend just 1 or 2 minutes. Today is MP Panditji's birthday, the 14th of June. So, just a couple of words on him so we remember the luminary. Shri M.P. Pandit, a senior sadhak at the ashram, who served as mother's secretary for the longest time. He joined the ashram around the year 1939, and very soon, in a couple of years, he took on the mighty task of being the mother's secretary, and till the mother left in 1973, he was playing that role. He was born on 14th June 1918 in Sirsi, in Karnataka, in the very state we are all sitting. His writing career spanned 6 decades, and he's written over 150 books, many articles many articles on topics as diverse as philosophy, spirituality, social and political thought, science, religion, mysticism, and the scriptures. Renaissance often features writings by Panditji. The one that they featured in November 2022, which is on the spirit of Karma Yoga at the Sri Aurobindo Ashram. Beluji pointed me to this because of how pertinent it is to what we are all studying together today. And so, just a minute on this. Our sincere respects, our pranams to this great soul on his birth anniversary. All right. So, today, as I came in a little early and I was praying to the mother, I was telling Beluji as well. This topic on works as a sacrifice, it is a little subtle. It's very nuanced, as we might have seen in what Beluji covered as well in Yoga Karma Sukhaushalam. The entire thing is just so entwined with our everyday life that to be able to separate ourselves from our own situations and then actually talk about these higher teachings and then to a group of people while being reminded that half the time we are not following it ourselves can be very tricky. So I prayed with the mother, and luckily what I got was over the last 6 years or so that I have been reading Sri Aurobindo and the mother, the one thing I can take away. There have been many revelations, small experiences, and it's just beautiful. But the sheer joy of feeling something when we read something new, or when we realize something in our life, when we have read and haven't understood, and we labor and we've understood a little bit, and then something happens in life and it reminds us of that, and the sheer joy that we experience, it's just so beautiful. So, something that she hinted was, if a little ounce of that joy can be spoken of and shared, that's enough for today. I don't think I'm in any capacity to preach anything when not following much of what I'm talking about. And my husband is here today, so he's a reminder to me of how less sometimes we follow what we talk about.
That's why I was so comfortable.
Right? So all right. So with that humble understanding, let us begin that we are all equal today, and we're just trying to understand a little of Sri Aurobindo and take joy in the process. That's all we are trying to do, right? So work as sacrifice. We will, in the zigzag path that mother spoke of, go zigzag and try to get to works as a sacrifice, because it's not so easy. We can't take a direct path. We are not there yet, right? So I will also try and skip Some portions that Beluji beautifully covered, though they feature in my slides as well. Will not go over them all over again, just to keep it a little simple and quicker, keeping in mind the time, right? So we'll start off with Nishkama Karma, which I will not spend too much time on, but we'll go into the subtler aspect of this Nishkama Karma, which is around renunciation. What should we understand? How should we renounce? And what makes it possible? Being seated in the Lord. What does it mean to be seated in the Lord? And through that, try and make our small baby steps in doing works as a salvation. Okay, let's come down as an offering, right? What are the concepts of desire? Why I'm saying concept? It is prevalent in us, but there is a reason for it that Sri Aurobindo tells us, and we shall understand that. And then the magnanimous concept of sacrifice and how we can, as our friend reminded us, even in our small ways, take it up, not just in the big dealings, but in our small dealings as well. I'm not going over the verse, just keeping in mind the time and going straight to the essence of it, right? I'll start by saying that there are, as we read this most popular verse 47, chapter 2, it has been analyzed innumerable number of times by so many creative geniuses. And it has actually inspired so much of action and creative depiction, right? We all know examples in our movies, in the writings, etc. But depending on our level of consciousness, just like as we press out the juice of a fruit and much may be spilt or diluted before it is offered for consumption. Similarly, this verse and many others in the Gita are many a time lost on us, and they are presented to us and we consume it in a much reduced manner. There are two ways of interpreting this verse with our mind, with our mental capacity. If we are not doggedly focused on the result of a task we take up, we are more light-hearted in our approach. We are open and vast. I'm using call upon the Varuna, but that's too vast. If we are little vast in how we take up a task and then approach it, not just will we finish it, the task, not just will we rush to the outcome, but in the process, we'll learn. We'll be told a few things, we will grow a little, we will enjoy, we will have made friendships, and the whole thing stays away from becoming a very arduous, stressful activity and a better learning experience. If we stop at this mental level in analyzing this verse, still we would have benefited from it. Still we would have benefited. But the verse has another aspect which says, do not be under the illusion that you can influence the result of the task or the outcome of a task, it says. And then, like Beluji alluded to, nature is the doer of works. Therefore, you, your small self, is not actually working towards the outcome, but you are but an instrument. And then after all of these so-called demotivating statements of reducing your self-importance, it says, do not cling to inaction. Do the action. So you can see how many contradictory aspects this verse has. And then there are two questions that were asked of Sri Aurobindo. If there is desirelessness, if there is no desire from the task I'm doing, then what is the motive for action? And second, if there is no doership also, no ownership, then how can I bring my best to the work? No desire, no ownership, and give your best? They're very tricky, right? And Sri Aurobindo, being Sri Aurobindo, of course, beautifully answers it. And we will try to take a little bit from that. But to understand that little bit, we have to take many steps further. We can't just do it at this level. But for sure, the mental understanding of this verse is not enough. We have to rise a little higher to be able to address all of the seemingly contradictory questions that come up once we try to understand this, right? The first is that because nature is the doer of work, then what should be our posture, our position in taking up the work? That is where mother's saying of remember and offer. That when we take up any work, we do it as an offering to the divine. How? How do we do it as an offering to the divine? Suddenly, till yesterday, we've been doing offering to ourselves for my money, for my recognition, for all the implications that come from the outcome. Okay, I won't focus on the outcome. Outcome can be thoda less, aise, thoda vaise. But either ways, my promotion should come. How can I do it? See, there is no shortcut to this. And I will now straight go to what Sri Aurobindo has said on what Sri Krishna has said, which is the Param Drishtva, which is by adopting the vision of the Supreme. And unfortunately, we must catapult to that level, and there is no shortcut to understand this, because all of these verses of the Gita can truly be understood when we make God the center of our lives. If we don't make God the center of our lives and we float on the surface, and we, like some management gurus and political ideologists, only want the thing that benefits us for that situation, and we want the power of the Gita to help, bulldoze through our ideology to the masses, it may not work, and is therefore seldom retained, often forgotten. But when we, through an arduous, slow, and when the mother says straight path, the straight path is a lot of tapasya as well. So sometimes probably the zigzag is meant for us through our own life's vicissitudes, right? So therefore, only when we make God the center of our life, make the divine your 24/7 preoccupation, says the mother. There is no other way to understand the Gita. We cannot understand, like Peluji said, there is no karma yoga without yoga, without at least the aspiration for union with the divine. Outcome is not ours to own right now. The aspiration for the union with the divine is the starting point of karma yoga. And therefore, no understanding of karma yoga, the divine consecration of works, without some jnana yoga, knowing the God a little bit more through reading, through experience, through identifying, through praying, and nothing at all without bhakti yoga, through the devotion, we will remind ourselves of yesterday. Though thou slay me, still I shall trust in thee. There is no other way. We may not get there. It is not a goal. It is a starting point. Only with our mind, because that is the only faculty we own. With our mind, we will say, Mother, remind me that you are the center of my life. If I forget you and then do the work, then it is not any consecration of work at all. And how, by making God the center of our lives, can we get the vision of the Supreme? I was so thrilled when Beluji already introduced this. By adopting the Madhbhava, that we can only pray for it. Become my-minded, said Krishna. When we aspire, our job is aspiration. Our job, our cut-out duty is aspiration. And the lifetime may pass without achieving anything, that's okay. It's all taken in the credit book of God, Sri Aurobindo says. Right? So we will aspire for the vision of the Supreme. We will not achieve it. What is achievement? Surely when we achieve it, we will not realize it. Someone else will realize it. Right? So we will aspire for that Madhbhava spirit, and we will adopt the Param Drishtva, that God is at the center of our lives. And everything else is under the ministry of the mother. What will happen will happen. Another beautiful term that Sri Aurobindo uses, desireless action of the senses with the objects. The senses will do the work. They will not be involved. Let's move to the next to understand this a little. Desireless contact of the senses with its objects. I will elaborate on it. It's Sri Aurobindo's terminology. All his prose is poetic. It's not easy. So I have worked a month on this, so I will try a minute on this. We will go to renunciation, which is the subtler aspect of this entire. As we are slowly crawling towards works as a service, it starts with renunciation. And by renunciation, we all understand it's full complete in our scriptures that we give up work. How do? We go to sannyasa, we give up everything, we give up our works, we give up our money, we give up our prestige, all that we have, we give up. And then we are left with pretty much nothing else to give. And then, we kind of become a burden. Possibly, I'm going the other extreme. That's not the case. But the point being that may not be the complete, or at least Sri Aurobindo's explanation of renunciation to us, right?
Gita's explanation.
Or the Gita's explanation of renunciation to us, right? So what is renunciation? Renunciation of works, I have said, and Sri Aurobindo has said, I have only copied, need not be physical. But if that is what is required for our lower selves, then let's renounce a few things to start with. But that is not it, and certainly that is not enough. A physical renunciation is not enough. What does it mean? The famous story where the guru and the shishya come to the bank of a river. There is a woman in distress. The guru lifts up the woman, crosses the river, places her safely on the other side. The shishya is aghast because brahmacharya. And then he's like, can't sleep for 2 nights. And then he asks the guru, what have you done? Like, now you have fallen. And he says, you are still holding the woman. I left her there just to help her. We have to be practical. When things have to be done, they have to be done. When work has to be done. When money has to be earned, it has to be earned. When children have to be provided, education, food, all of that has to be provided. We can't behave like sannyasis. It's the inner renunciation that matters. And subtle that it may be, we must understand and seize this message, right? The inner renunciation is what, and again, Sri Aurobindo in his poetic style says, subjective cessation of the rasa. The rasa that the shishya was holding to of the guru carrying the woman. So we are mental beings. Mana prana sharira neta. We are guided by our mind. All action is guided by the thought. Thought spurs action. If we mechanically detach ourselves from action, but our thought has not detached from the thing, there is no detachment whatsoever, and we will very soon fall prey to action when the opportunity so arises. Correct? So therefore, an inner detachment, an inner renunciation is what we must practice. This image that I have chosen, is what Mother has named this vital renunciation. The Mother, as many of you might have heard, has given names to a lot of flowers. My little understanding based on the characteristics they exude and the spiritual significance they hold.
She used to go in the consciousness of the flower.
Consciousness of the flower. Thank you, Neelamji. Yes. And then give names, right? So I thought this was so, as a think of this flower, plant life, still not even the mind, but it somehow in its action depicts vital renunciation, right? However, all of these are Sri Aurobindo's words. I have not put on every slide. They are all his words. Senses cannot be roped in. Mind cannot be controlled. Neither can desire vanish, desireless action, nishkama karma, nor doership disappear unless we are able to fix our every attention with love and adoration for help and guidance on the Supreme Lord. Right? So again, unless we are approaching God with what we have our heart, we are able to center our mind and heart on a on an emotion, on a subjective feeling, then if we can center that we have on God, then we will be able to aim for desireless contact with senses. Then, says Sri Aurobindo, okay, let's take a step back. The Supreme has created all of the universe, the creation. From what we have read, we now understand that the divine is not some detached force or power sitting far above, away from the world he has created. He is one with the world, he is immanent in the world. And if he is immanent in the world and one with the world and is making everything run still, he is not troubled by the tremblings or the tremors that happen in the world. Right? As we know and read more of the Lord, then we understand a little more. He reveals to us a little more when we have that aspiration in our heart that show us a little bit of yourself. And then when we understand a little more, then we fall in love a little more with the Lord. And then when we have that knowledge and love, and we understand his ways, his dealings, and then the mind-mindedness happens, then it is possible for the desireless contact of senses with the objects, with the works, which means that we engage in the works. The senses have to do the works. We have senses of action and we have senses of knowledge. Knowledge, our eyes, ears, sight, etc., and the senses, the jnani indriyas, they are always involved in input, output. But they need not be lost in the work. The mind through which all action happens need not be lost in the work. It can focus on the divine. And we can start with beginning, end, somewhere in the middle to start with, remember and offer, and then move to more remembrance. Right? So that's my understanding. And yes, this is very important. A lot of times, and I think Beluji also alluded to this, sometimes Gita is preached as a set of impersonal guidelines. Like, let us adopt detachment. Let us do without desire. Let us just live in the present moment and be happy with whatever work is assigned to us. But just to follow some of these higher teachings through reduced impersonal set of rules or guidelines may not be so easy unless at our core, at our center, there is a transformation of how we think, how we conduct ourselves by a sheer act of faith. If we are not turning inward, then just doing this as an impersonal set of rules may not be so simple. Right? Therefore, there is no Gita without Krishna. If there is not that supreme faith on what the Lord has preached, and we are not flown and we don't flow in the delight of these words and these verses, then it is difficult to imbibe what he teaches. Right? So the sheer enjoyment of reading and indulging and understanding and little more understanding, and unless that process, that churning happens, it is difficult to kind of embrace the Gita. And therefore, I'm saying that the essence of the Gita that we can realize really lies in the reality of the Krishna that we can absorb. And we can only absorb that much of Krishna, then we will embrace that much of Gita. And then, there are all these questions of, oh, did Krishna not cheat? And he was a little bit of a trickster. And yes, all of this is part of his Leela. But as we grow in our consciousness and we are able to absorb the greater and the fuller consciousness of Krishna, then so much will the Gita flow into our life. Right? We'll keep moving. Sorry, I'm going a little slower. We'll rely on a verse here. Tani sarvani samyamya yukta asita matparaha vashehi yasyendriyani tasya pragya pratishtita. So, Tani sarvani samyamya, by gathering all of our being, we are an aggregate, you see. We have so many parts in us. so many aspects in us. By aggregating all of those mental, vital, lower vital, physical aspects of us, yukta asita matparaha, united when we seat in the Lord. Vashehi yasyendriyani. Vash milena. Then by that we can control our senses. Tasya pragya pratisthita. Thus, the higher intelligent will can be steadied in the Lord. Then it will be possible to move among the objects by not being at their mercy. If something goes a little different from how we expected and it quickly upsets us, and then we become angry, and so only then we can move to a liberation, a calm, a tranquil mind and senses. With that serenity, do action, says Krishna, and not any action. After all the Brahmic poise and the tranquility and the serenity that Sri Krishna, teaches, coaches Arjuna on, then he says, now take up the ghor karma of war. Arjuna is devastated because the more he realizes he is understanding, the more he falls back and says, what are you saying, Krishna? This is just so contradictory. I have just begun to understand the tranquil poise, and now you say, take up the killing. And then Krishna introduces the Sthita Pragya. The Sthita Pragya. The Sthita Pragya is one who is established in the calm Brahmic poise, who is equal to all of life. Our mind is an instrument of division. Its job, how it does its job, Sri Aurobindo explains, is by division. It can never synthesize various aspects that accost it, that encounter it through the senses. It cannot make sense. Therefore, if there is a large problem, the mind will break it down. It will absorb one aspect of the problem, then other aspect of the problem, and the third aspect of the problem. And at the end, it will have three solutions. May not be able to synthesize all of it. I'm saying it in a very simplistic way. Most of us, we will only know when we experience it, that we would have understood, and then it quickly disappears because all we have done is absorb it with the mind. After a month, when we have a similar situation, we won't apply the teachings of the Gita. It's not that simple, right? The life principle is far more sticky. The mind is just analyzing, taking in, analyzing, and forgetting. Because it depends on memory. And what's the strength of our memory? Right? So, therefore, the mind principle is what is predominant in us. Invariably, the dividing principle of the mind sees the world in dualities. Pain, pleasure, two different things. Evil, good, very different things. Joy, sorrow, completely different experiences. And that is how we live our life, because mind is predominant in us, right? But the Sthita Pragya, because he rises above the mind. This is sheer rising of consciousness. It is not realizing mentally something told. He rises above the consciousness and the predominance of the mind. Because he rises, he is able to view all of life with an equal vision. And because he is able to do that and rest in the oneness of the Lord, therefore he is liberated in action. Whatever is the outcome does not matter. Whatever is the experience does not matter. He's doing it as the divine command. And Arjuna asks, how do I recognize the Sthita Pragya? In the essays on the Gita, Sri Aurobindo says, the most discernible sign of the Sthita Pragya is still inner. Nothing outer. He cannot understand. This is the way he conducts himself. This is the way he speaks in public. This is the tone with which he talks. None of that might show you whether or not a person is Sthita Pragya. Difficult. Long. We'll keep moving. Now that we have just to center ourselves, and I don't need to read this, if you can just read and say which of these, in your view, is the one who is following the teaching of the Gita. Just 30 seconds. I'm just hearing too much of my own voice. One, two, or three. Anyone? Three? Okay. Anyone else? None of these, yeah. None of these, actually. Yeah. So not the sannyasin, because we're not talking about the physical renunciation of works, although he may have, but not because of being the sannyas, right? Not philanthropic work, certainly not the way most of it happens nowadays. But again, it can be. Let's not be clouded. It can be. If someone's truly taken it up. You know, they say about philanthropy, do it if it gives joy to you. You're not doing a favor on anyone else. If one can really live by that, then maybe. Right? One who's, yeah, this work is worship. How much I have heard from my father, I cannot tell you. All my childhood. Work is worship, hence work. You know, and I wanted neither work nor worship. It's tricky. So, yeah, all right. So we'll move. Yeah.
Can I just give one example from
Yes,
the
yes.
ashram about the philanthropy charity? So it's an ashram story, you know, the Golconda guest house. When that was being built, the Nizam of Hyderabad wanted to send some money under the condition that his name will be put on some plaque somewhere. Mother said, yeah, take the money and tell them that we put a brick somewhere, you know, so that people will walk out. And obviously, Nizam would not like his name to be, you know, stamped up on a brick or something. So obviously, they rejected mother's offers. Mother said, we don't need their money. So that's the thing, the philanthropy done with the intention of, yeah, egoistic.
Wow, what an opportunity lost. Yeah, okay. Now we'll go into a very tricky. Yes, yes.
Nature's constant pushing us
Towards the
Ideal.
towards the ideal, whether it's the sannyasi's life or whether it's Rishi's or
Yes.
in the philanthropy. Nature always challenges, but we don't notice it.
True.
There is a way to
Because they are all impersonal qualities.
we all
We all have. It gives a push, but lower nature
keeps
stops us.
pulling one to it.
Yeah.
It's almost like, yeah. So all of it, I think that's where Shrivatam is integral yoga and also Dharma yoga being it is the recognition that we're doing even service for our own transformation.
Yeah.
That
Correct.
part becomes
Yeah. Because the mind reduces, you know, even if we listen to the divine word, you know, then it kind of gets reduced. And Sri Aurobindo, I think I've read somewhere that he says, as soon as it is expressed, it is already reduced. And then we work from there. And then, you know, then if we kind of apply it, we further, you know, kind of, we are always reducing that pure teaching. Okay. So when it's difficult, let's just take up a verse and see what they have to say. Indriyani paranyahur, indriyebhyah param manaha, manasastu para buddhiryo, buddhe paratastu saha. This simply means senses are greater than gross matter. Higher than the senses is the mind. Buddhi, which is the higher intellect, is higher than the mind. Above the buddhi is the self or that. I think the first thing we will start with is what is buddhi, right? Sri Aurobindo has explained that there are three terms, and I hope I'm remembering this correctly. There are three aspects that define buddhi. One is viveka, the discernment of the right and the wrong. The mind, the dividing faculty, looks at it very superficial. But the discernment of what is right for me at this stage or at this, you know, juncture of my life, you know, that discernment of what's good, what's not, that discernment. The second is the knowledge, being seated in the right knowledge, the higher knowledge, right? And the third is the will, the capability, the readiness to be able to act on that understanding. Is this combination is what is buddhi. Krishna says, seat, therefore, we have to rise higher. If you remember Beluji's slide from yesterday, some of you who've seen it, that when Arjuna is at this conflict of, the dilemma of what to do, he comfortably wants to slip lower. But Krishna urges him to go higher, which is the tougher stance to take. So we are always being nudged, like Jayashree ji said, we are always being nudged to go higher. So the senses, rather than being always externalized, seat them in the reasoning mind. Don't just take and impulsively act, but analyze, reason it with your mind. The mind has to be seated in that higher intellect, those spurs of knowledge and intuition that come and open up a few things for us. Can we, seize from there and enrich, make vast our mind? And then the buddhi has to be then seated in the Lord, the adoration, the matparaha and all, so that the buddhi itself grows. Attain peace, serenity, and calm poise by being seated in the Supreme. And from that poise, take up action. So then, irrespective of the work that we take up, your work becomes a means of salvation. This in the last slide, wherein the mother, also has stressed on, when work is not done for any outer outcome, desire, when we leave the desire, okay, then there are implications, okay, outcome can be anything, but at least I should be recognized. My doership that I have done has to be recognized at least. When we are able to give up that, when we start to unveil and give those up, then there is a beauty and the joy that flows. Through that, work becomes a field of sadhana, right? And then learning, growth, delight, knowledge, all of that transpires, and they are subtle. They don't give the kick of joy or the feeling of achievement. They're more subtle, sometimes not so desired, but we experience them only when we are able to give up these bigger actors. Yeah. Now that we have reached and we just seem to have started to understand all of this, and we know it's a lot, but we're beginning to get into the groove. And we have heard so much about desireless action. Then I came across this in the Life Divine, and I'm going to read it verbatim, Sri Aurobindo's powerful words. About what is desire, Sri Aurobindo says, desire is actually quite fundamental to how we are made and how the universe is created. We can't just get rid of desire just like that. The attempt of the individual to maintain and aggrandize himself is the whole sense of desire. It can be physical, mental, vital, moral, spiritual. What is hunger in the vital parts? See, if there were only body, then the body is getting famished. But there is this life principle in us, the vital, the energy, the prana kosha, which tells us you're hungry. Now, impels us to go act, provide to the body. Hunger is in the vital parts for the safeguarding, for the protection of ourselves. That when the mind comes, the first levels of the mind comes, it becomes desire to own, to possess, to devour. What became self-preservation now becomes self-expansion in the vital parts. And then in the intellectual life is a will. The will, we will. Something looks impossible, we will take it up. We will do it. We will set an example. We will clear the roadblocks, the Mahakali force in us. That is the will that is in the intellectual level. All of these, Sri Aurobindo says, are forces of nature. Can't completely get rid of them. Desire is the lever by which the divine life principle affects its end. That means its objective, its goal of self-affirmation in the universe. And the attempt to extinguish desire is a very denial of this life principle. You can't just completely get rid of desire because we've learned desireless action in the yoga. Hence, yukta asita madpara. Hence, the entire path of integral yoga, the little that I'm able to understand, is rising your consciousness higher and higher and higher. So it is the higher desire. Jashi ji asked, differentiate between desire and aspiration. When the higher levels of mind come in, Sri Aurobindo teaches us, suddenly desire is no longer only about taking. It's about doing. And then it's about giving. And then when the love principle comes in, the highest of love is only by giving. But there is still desire there. The desire to love, the desire to give, the desire to share. But the desire principle exists. So the I won't say trick, but the clue that is being given is to elevate the nature of desire. We can't do it like as if we are some robot, some stoic, we have nothing inside of us. Now we will suddenly start following something outside of us. Till now, till the age of 40, 50, we have lived by, get this, a bigger car, a bigger house, a bigger this, like more wealth and all of that. And suddenly we stop listening and we start going by somebody else's rules. No, we have to make them our rules still, but a higher self. So we have to increase the level of our consciousness and then desire from there. And that will impel our action. Because this is his master, Mahakavya. One cannot cease to be individually except by being infinitely. We will keep desiring. We will keep desiring until we become the infinite, says Sri Aurobindo.
Color and texture changes.
Changes, yes. The complete definition has changed.
Yes, so it's like saying that the only way to detach ourselves from anything is to attach ourselves to something higher.
Something high, yes. So we cannot shed personal desire and become impersonal by obeying something outside of us. Even if it was Krishna. Krishna said do this, so blindly we will do. No, that is why Arjuna makes Krishna tell the whole Bhagavad Gita, because unless all his questions are answered and he becomes one with the teaching, how can he follow something that is external to him? Right? We can only shed surface desire by rising to the highest in ourselves, which is the divine in ourselves. So suddenly, as we start and put an effort to seat ourselves in the God, then finally maybe God will be seated in us. And then we will desire. So desireless works. Now, desireless works is only possible. How do we do it? Luckily, we have Mother who has embodied in the individual Mahashakti to teach us how to live, how to pray, how to love. So she says, only by doing all works as a sacrifice to the divine. Now, after navigating all of these concepts, we have finally arrived at the topic of our conversation, which is works as sacrifice. When we are able to sacrifice our works, let us start with offering. Offering our works to the divine. And being light-hearted about the outcome, because all now we want, what is our desire? That the divine accepts us. That's all. Ab kitna achhe se ho, that's not our problem. Once we have a feeling that the divine has accepted our work, that is our job. And therefore, because we want the divine to accept our work, can we do a shoddy work? Cannot do a shoddy. Because then inside there will be something that pulls at us, saying you did a bad work. And therefore, now show your face to the mother.
Offerable offering.
Right? Agli baar you go ask her for protection, help, show your face. बहुत ही खराब काम किया था. Still help me. Sometime we will pass through. But the 10th time it will pull at our heart. Say, not done. Right?
Yeah, it should be befitting.
Befitting to offer.
We don't want to offer anything randomly to divine, you know, in that sense. Our best.
Okay. So then we come, now that Sri Aurobindo has told us about sacrifice, we come to, this is the last, just one more slide. The law of sacrifice, says Sri Aurobindo. This is taken from Synthesis of Yoga. The law of sacrifice was thrown out into the world as a symbol of the solidarity of the universe. This law was thrown out to show everyone, to show humanity, whoever is deserving of knowing it, that the universe is one, the solidarity of the universe. The acceptance of the law of sacrifice is a practical recognition by the ego that it is neither alone in this world nor chief in this world. This entire Leela is not being played for the ego. If we need to have the rasa of this entire play not being caught in our little success, failure, pleasure, pain, then we have to rise higher to be able to see the Leela play out. All true love and all sacrifice are in their essence nature's contradiction of the primary egoism and its separative error. It is her attempt to turn from a necessary first fragmentation. First fragmentation happened. Individual egos or souls were created. It was necessary for a certain phase in the evolution of the earth, of the soul. It was essential. Because all tapasya has to be done one at a time. But ultimately, it all unifies, and this first fragmentation moves to a recovered oneness. It's a little tough to understand, but you know, if whatever we can take away from it. The mother, of course, she's there to simplify it for us, sacrifices the joyful total self-giving of the individual consciousness to the divine in a perfect delight of service. If you look up the dictionary word of sacrifice, it will be giving up something to achieve something better. Achieve the higher is a painful exercise. What little we have, we have to give first, right? That is not sacrifice on the path of integral yoga. Because the subject, the one who's making the sacrifice, is the one who's enjoying the process of sacrifice. Because you're sacrificing on the altar of the divine. And there is a sheer joy that it is being accepted. Right? Works done as an offering automatically stay desireless. Desire from the outer perspective, they stay desireless and then become a means for sadhana and salvation. Hence, we have to, even if physically to start with, start to offer our works, then we have to mean, and like Neelamji said, make the works worth offering, then we have to mean and really remember to keep offering everything, and therefore big or small does not matter at all, whether it's the external affairs minister or us, we all offer. For the God, how does it matter? Like Krishna tells Arjuna, you don't fight. Kurukshetra will still happen. Dharma will still be established. You enjoy, I'm giving you the opportunity. Right? Yes.
Either you participate or you don't
Or you
participate.
It's
The war
okay.
is on.
Yes, the war is on. Right? So the very last slide. So I'll just go with the last statement. I won't read everything. This is just such a beautiful picture. I've taken it from one of the Renaissance Agni, who is the ultimate, the Hotar, the Purohita in the Vedic principle of sacrifice. Life itself is a sacrifice where we put forth into the Agni for purification. Going back, our lower vital nature. We put our lower vital nature. It's a raw deal for the God actually, because he takes all our muck, all our lower things, nothing much to offer because that's all we possess. So we offer that and then it gets purified in the process. And how beautifully we become the channel for the divine elements that flow through. That is the Vedic sacrifice, and how much we can bring it into our life is up to us and our growth. But this last statement was just so beautiful, and it actually answers why I was looking for that gentleman who asked that question yesterday. I want to share with everyone. He asked me, can you just talk about mother is the way, mother is the goal? It was so lofty, and I said, but we need to cover something here, so I'm not sure if I can take it up. But if you see this last statement, it's just so apt. The universal energy into which action is poured, is offered, is poured. It is offered and consecrated. The one who's offering and consecrating is the divine. He is the giver of the offering, which is the divine in man. The divine in man, because unless we rise to that level of consciousness and have a touch of the divine, how can we sacrifice? So it is the divine in man who's sacrificing. The action, the works that are being sacrificed is the divine in movement. The goal to be reached by doing all of this, that rasa, that soma, that delight is the divine. Because Bhagavan, like Peluji said, is all bliss, all enjoyment. And for the man who knows this, lives and acts in it, where is the bondage that Arjuna was talking about yesterday? Right? Where is the bondage by karma if you are able to realize this and then work? This is really the... Thank you so much.